Welcome to Conversations with Writers. I'm Andy. I'm a writer and a writing instructor in higher education. And this is an educational YouTube series meant to catalog writing strategies and philosophies through conversation with other writers. William J. Cobb is a novelist, short story writer, and essayist. His work has appeared in The New Yorker, The Antioch Review, and many other journals and magazines. His novels include The Bird Saviors, published by Unbridled Books in 2012, Goodnight, Texas, also published by Unbridled Books, but in 2006, and The Fire Eaters, published by Norton in 1994. His short story collections include The Lousy Adult, published by Johns Hopkins University Press in 2013, The White Tattoo, published by Ohio State University Press in 2002. He's also reviewed books for the New York Times, the Houston Chronicle, and the Dallas Morning News. Cobb teaches fiction writing at Penn State University and lives in Pennsylvania and Colorado. And this is my conversation with Bill.
Hi, Andy.
Hi, how are you?
Can you hear me? Okay, it looks like I need to start my video. All right, now you can see me. Let me
Now I
get
can see you.
that's better. Straighten my hair. Gotta have our hair straight. I got a haircut yesterday.
Awesome. It looks great.
It was a little bit of a mullet before that. I have a stylist here in town who's been cutting my hair for a long time. I don't know, probably more than 10 years, 15, 20 years, a long time. And I moved over the summer to Colorado and I needed a haircut. So I went and I got this woman. I was saying, well, you know, my hair, he usually cuts my hair like this and this. She's like, shut up, I'm gonna cut your hair no matter what. So it was kind of long in the back and shorter on the sides. And it was just a little bit mullety. So now I'm more respectful, maybe.
So, gonna get the haircuts in State College from now on instead of Colorado.
Eventually I'll live out there all the time. So I have to find a stylist, but you know, you kind of need someone that you trust and you have some kind of relationship with, and I don't know anyone out there. So
Yeah, haircut is a very intimate thing.
and how is your semester going so far?
I'm keeping my head above water so far. Once major papers come in from all classes, we'll see how that goes and where I'm standing at that point. I might decide I need therapy.
I've had 3 assignments, so I have 2 classes and they kind of do more or less the same thing. I just finished grading the 3rd one and I'm like, I need a break already. I tend to give them short assignments early in the semester. And so I have one on the syllabus for today that would be due Monday. And I told them all, okay, I've got enough for now. It won't be due Monday. It'll be due in 2 weeks. So it'll give me a little break. They're doing all what they need to do, but I don't need to overwork them or myself.
Exactly. And I think that's probably the sentiment we all need to take in this semester and maybe future semesters too, beyond the pandemic.
Are you in person or online?
Both. I'm doing both.
Oh.
Yeah. So it feels like I'm on call and I'm constantly answering emails.
That's what my job as director is. The email is the worst part. You're not doing any hybrid though, are you?
Nope. I've got one section of 15 online, one section of 15 in person, and then 13 in person.
Well, I taught at the end of last semester hybrid. And that seems like the worst of both worlds, in that you have to pay attention to the students who are Zooming And so that's on the screen, but then you have the students that were right in front of you. And last spring, the classroom was real big because of the social distancing idea. We've given up on that, you know.
Yeah, clearly.
And so they were all kind of spread out, and it was just really hard to function. Um, there are certain things you can do on Zoom, and certain things you can do in person, and I like in person much better. I'm not a fan of Zoom, but I did it for 3 semesters almost, I guess.
I actually don't mind the teaching online because of the institution I graduated from. WU is a teaching institution. They made sure that we had training in basically any eventuality. So I had online teaching experience previously before I even came here to Penn State. And so I found the transition fairly easy because I knew, okay, if I'm doing Tuesday, Thursday, or Monday, Wednesday, Friday style class, you know, either 2 days a week or 3 days a week, what's the expectation? How much can they reasonably digest in a distance setting? And because I'm pretty familiar with Canvas anyway, I've been using that because I teach so many sections. It's just easier to collect things through Canvas so that I'm not carrying around luggage.
I actually like Canvas.
Yeah.
I think it's a big improvement over Angel, and all of my coursework is on Canvas. Everything.
Right. So the systems in there are pretty easy to use. You click around on some buttons, and if you break something, there's always someone you can email or call that'll fix whatever you've broken. So I've experimented a lot with that, and I feel like I know it pretty well. I just wish they wouldn't update in the middle of the semester.
For me, for Zooming or online, I mean, Canvas is great, but the fact that we couldn't require them to turn on their cameras was a major problem. I mean, I went along with it, but you know, a class of 20, like half of them are just black screens, and I'm the kind of professor who calls on students all the time. And I'd say, well, Nick, what do you think of that? Nick, are you there? Nick's not paying any attention. So he's just, you know, clicking on to the site, but it's just a waste of time. So
he's functionally not there.
Unfortunately, there was too much of that.
I did asynchronous, and what I did was they had the basic shells for 15, which I just gutted and redid myself and reorganized things. And what I did was a series of discussion notes. And if they were meeting 3 days a week, then I would make sure that the discussion notes that I gave them, which would function like the lecture or the in-class discussion, run them through activities and simplify concepts from the text and ask them questions to think about and run them through different exercises. And I always gave them writing prompts, and then they would use how they participated in that in the discussion forums, and they would have several different options for responding to create classroom discussions and community and then respond to each other. And I found that really effective. And then I also supplemented with videos that were somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes long.
I use online discussions where it's usually like about they've read a short story or two, and I give background information that I usually don't spend that much time in class on, let's say, talking about Flannery O'Connor or James Joyce or something. I give some background stuff that I wouldn't give in class, so to me it's better. The students, they don't tend to care. Especially for older writers from the misty past. But I do what I think is good for them, and whether they like it or not, that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it went pretty well despite the kerfuffles in terms of the online sections that I taught. And the evals actually came out pretty good too, which I was surprised about. But
well, so you going to ask me some questions about writing?
Yes. So what are you working on now in creative terms, in terms of prose, and what motivated the project?
Well, I tend to be a pretty productive writer but I'll slant my answer a little bit about the strengths and weaknesses. But I'm really awful at the business side of writing. So right now, I have two novel manuscripts that I should be sending out, and should my agent retired. So, normally the right thing to do would be immediately kind of aggressively go find another agent. But I'm just so busy with my life that I always put writing as number one, and all the business side of it that's like number 10 or something, but it's important as well. So right now I have a novel manuscript titled The Reinvented, which is probably my favorite project of the moment. And it's kind of pandemic related in that it doesn't, it's a satire. It's funny, meant to be funny. And it doesn't completely identify COVID or anything, but there's some pandemic. And one of the responses, like our vaccine, is you get a little chip called the O chip implanted somewhere in your body, usually on the wrist. And it can verify vaccination status, health information, all kinds of stuff. And I see other writers have taken that leap about technological innovations that will have some effect on the population. But there's some side effects of this, and one of the side effects is that for some people, there's a term for it, TGA. It's called transient global amnesia, and it's a real thing. You forget who you are. Then the transient part, it doesn't last unnecessarily very long, not like weeks or anything, maybe more like hours. And I had a friend who told me this story, and it always kind of stuck with me. She had a kind of an adventurous husband, and it's kind of an adventurous rich guy type of husband. And they were off the coast of California and were being dropped off on an island in a raft. So off of a kind of, like a yacht, dropped them off on this island, and it was too hard to get to the shoreline. And then they were going to hike across the island and then be picked up on the other side. So really kind of eco, super adventure, roughing it. And I think at the time they were like in their 50s or 60s. She was about 70 when she told me the story. So they're in the raft, they're getting close to the shoreline, and all of a sudden he can't paddle anymore. And he's staring at her. And she's like, paddle, we need to go up on shore. They're in the part where the waves are crashing on you. And he lost his memory completely. And he says, who are you? What are we doing here? And he was completely helpless and just befuddled. So they made it to shore. And she said it was really hard to get him to do anything because he just didn't understand where they were and what they were doing. But she managed to get him to do enough and to hike across the island. They were picked up, and his amnesia went away within, I think in that situation, it was maybe a little over a day or so from the story as I remember it. But I always thought that was very fascinating, that you could forget who you were, but then it could come back. And in my story, a man who has this chip, he's on a trip with his family, and they're at one of those vacation club things where they tried to sell you a timeshare. Only this is a futuristic one in which you can choose a new family. And it's like you can have a new wife, you can have new children, smarter children, better children. And it's kind of based on, I've been to some of those timeshare talks, and they talk about how the fabulous new life you're going to have if you sign here on the dotted line and give us $50,000 or whatever it is. So normally he wouldn't do this, and it was it's kind of a series of accidents that put him into this position. But in this case, he does, because he doesn't really remember, oh, like who his wife is. So he signs away. And then his wife is notified, and his kids, that he's chosen to disassociate from you. And it's all kind of futuristic. It's not like the regular world, and that this is all accepted somehow. But as soon as he comes to his senses, and as soon as he remembers who he is, he's trying to get back to his wife and kids, the whole scope of the novel. And there's like one thing after another that get in his way. And it's pretty much a satire comedy on technology and our particular unusual moment in time.
That sounds amazing, and I can't wait to actually read it. So what did you learn about yourself or the human condition through writing this project?
Well, when you ask me what did I learn about myself, I have to say I'm a writer. I believe much more. I don't think about myself that much. I believe much more in extrospection, and to look at the world, and of course be fascinated, interested, and enthusiastic about something in it, and try to find some glimmer of insight or exaggeration that you can show something about that world. And there is an introspective moment that was in part of this novel idea. I was on vacation in Utah, and it's really isolated. Again, it's kind of like an eco-adventure type place. I was on a rafting trip, middle of the nowhere, Canyonlands place in Utah, in southeastern Utah. And I woke up in the middle of the night at a hotel, but that rafters used to it's a jumping off place to go rafting on the San Juan River, which is real famous. I woke up in the middle of the night, and for a few minutes, I didn't know where I was. And I was looking up at the lights on the ceiling, and I was like, where am I? Who am I? And for just like brief moments, I was disoriented. And this has happened in other hotels, and especially when I travel a lot. And it's like, where am I now? But it was such an interesting little moment for me that was the impetus and the origin for the idea of the story. That what happens if you forget who you are? And then I remembered that story about that I had heard years before from my friend. So even though I say I don't think about myself that much, of course I'm part of the canvas and part of the story. And I hope that if I learn anything about myself, it's the vulnerabilities that make us real and whole.
That's a wonderful answer. Thank you. So for you, what is the role or responsibility of writing? What keeps you generating material? Why write?
Well, I have to admit that and like most kind of English majors and writers, that I've been voracious readers from probably about 5th and 6th grade. I started reading a lot more than all my friends and stuff. And I always thought that would be something worthwhile to do. When I was like reading adventure novels in middle school, it's like, well, that'd be a cool thing to do, to be a writer. And little did I know how much work it could be. You're always so naive. It's like, yeah, I'll just be, autographing books at a book signing event at a bookstore somewhere. Yeah, that stuff's not important. And so the nuts and bolts of it are much more important, and what fills up most of our lives. But as far as responsibility, I do notice that my approach is different than my students' approach in that I think we have a responsibility to reach some kind of truth and insight into human nature, and that there's some should be some richness of ideas in our work. And I think that's the responsibility to art. That, my favorite writers were like Vladimir Nabokov, Cormac McCarthy. They've all produced amazing novels that tell us something about the world and something important. And when I say, I sometimes notice that I'm at odds with my students. I just graded one of their assignments that is story ideas for the semester. It's all like goblins, demons, elves, swords, lords and ladies. And to me, and I studied medieval lit. So I'm an expert on medieval lit. Yeah, that was 1,000 years ago. But they love that crap. And they all want to write it. So to me, that's just writing for entertainment. But I'm sure there's someone who could say, oh, Game of Thrones, it's fascinating analysis of power and this and that. And yeah, but it's a lot of swords and shit too.
What we wouldn't give for a student to write a paper about the existential crisis that's created from a trip to the grocery store.
It kind of depends. I'd say the students, besides the goblins and demons and stuff, they're about half of them, their ideas are very philosophical. And I tend to start with the particular to reach the universal. So I don't come in with some philosophical idea. I want to write a story about a woman who swallowed her wedding ring. And I wrote a story like that once. And, from the very specific thing, and then reach some greater idea. But the students can be very philosophical. Maybe they need to turn around, but they'll learn.
Absolutely. So when you're struggling to write, and it's a common problem for a lot of our students, especially when they have to produce material so quickly. So when you're struggling to write for whatever reason, whether there's too many ideas or not enough ideas, etc., what strategies do you use to get yourself to the page?
One thing that I mentioned to my students today that I think it's probably one of my bigger and more commonly used techniques if I'm struggling. I struggle to find time. I mean, that's just, my day is so busy and you have to fit it in. And of course, their days are busy too. Riffing, where rather than, okay, I have to write a scene in a short story to get across this idea, I just start writing about goblins. And, if there's a goblin who needs to change his tire, it's like, do goblins drive cars? And that just frees me up. So I don't feel that I'm having to force myself to write a story. But let's say I'm interested in writing a story about goblins, although actually I don't really know much about goblins, that it's just kind of an open-ended thing. And I have no rigid expectations about whether it will appear in the short story or the novel or not. It's just, I'm just riffing on it. And that seems to kind of loosen me up and free me from putting too much pressure to produce that well-polished scene or something like that.
I think that's really helpful, and I'm probably going to steal that when if I teach English 50 again. So what revision strategy or strategies do you find most effective or useful for you when you're revising your own work? What problems or challenges do these activities help you solve?
You had a question in there that said, what's your favorite aspect of writing? And for me, that's really clear cut. My favorite part of writing is just coming up with the ideas and writing the description to begin with. That is absolutely my favorite. And I was like, oh yeah, that could be cool. And in fact, I'm writing a story right now about a rehab facility for cancer culture people. People have been canceled. So they go to this rehab and again, it's kind of a satire thing, which a lot of my fiction in the last few years has been. So they've done something horrible that got them canceled, and they get together, and it's like an Alcoholics Anonymous, an alcoholic rehab. So they talk about it and like how you can recover from that and everything. And when I'm coming up with those ideas and getting up in the middle of the night to write a paragraph or a page or something, that's my favorite part. I hate revisions. I mean, we all have to do it. And I do try to keep in mind that every story is a work of art. And so you're trying to make this most compelling, most entertaining, and most captivating work of art when you write a story. And that tends to help, but revisions are hard, and it takes time and effort. And novels are particularly hard. For me, a short story, often I write a short story pretty quickly, maybe like a couple weeks. I get a rough draft, and then I let it sit for a few weeks and then do a revision on it. And all the while, I've been keeping in mind what I think are the weaknesses and how to make it better. But sometimes with a short story, I can go from like rough idea to finished product within about a month or 6 weeks. Novel, that's like 4 years. So that's really hard. And after a while, you just grow to hate it yourself because you're so tired of looking at it. But short stories, because it's so much shorter, that I find at least that's a lot easier and faster.
What reading suggestions do you have? What writers or authors do you keep in your back pocket, and why? So I noticed that you mentioned a few prose writers earlier on. Is there anything else that you would add to that list?
Well, there's a ton of writers that I read for inspiration. And I mentioned Vladimir Nabokov. I mean, he's one of the greatest stylists ever. And when I read his prose, it's like, it gives me a star to steer by. And it's like, I want to write prose that good. And Cormac McCarthy does something that doesn't really come naturally to me. He can describe a scene without telling you what the characters think at all. No interiority to the characters, but you're totally captivated, and you can guess what they're thinking and what emotions they're experiencing. And I haven't reread McCarthy recently for a while, but he was one of my favorites for many years. Nabokov just had a passage in a recent issue of New Yorker, and I did reread that, and it's part from 1955 of his novel Penin. But of contemporary writers, George Saunders is one of my favorite. He's a funny writer and funny satire. I read a lot of nonfiction, and for a couple of years, I was really addicted to seafaring stories and polar adventure stories. And especially late at night when or at night when I'm going to sleep, I don't really want artistic fiction at that point. I want a good adventure story just to take me away before I drift off into sleep. But if you find the right ones, there are some great ones. I think it's great material for your own writing, because it's all about struggles, emotional complexity, and as far as nonfiction goes, I think we writers, we have to know everything. That's a pressure, but it's good to have a wide range of knowledge and not just, limit yourself to, I don't know, whatever's on the TV or whatever is on your website, but keep trying to get wiser and more informed about the world throughout your life.
That was a great list. And thank you for making time to hang out with me. I've learned a lot, and I really appreciate it.
Andy, where is your office in Burroughs?